Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the ERE Web Forum. This is the third forum that we have been doing this month. We did the same forum a week ago, and we are repeating it today because there were so many people who could not get in last week. So thank you once again for joining us. We have three speakers today. We have Dr. Agnes, Justine, and Dr. Pelf. I'll introduce them a bit in greater detail when they start. So the format for the forum is we'll get the speakers to speak for 10 or 15 minutes, and then we'll open for some questions before we move on to the next speaker and so on. So once all three speakers have done, then we'll have quite a bit of time for Q&A. Very importantly, please keep your microphone off all the time. You can raise comments, questions using the chat function. You can only switch on your microphone when the moderator asks you to do so. So otherwise, there'll be simply too much background noise. To start off this forum, let me just share with you some examples of what communities are doing. So this is a picture that I see very often because this is taken at Bukit Gasing, PJ, where I go hiking regularly. Of course, not during this MCO period. So we have this group of people called the Friends of Bukit Gasing, who do all the trail maintenance, looking after the cleanliness, repairing the trails, planting trees. Every weekend they are there without fail, doing all this at their own time and at their own expense. We have similar examples in many other parts of the country. One of the famous one is Kampung Budu Tuhan in Sabah, which is a rural community that has a great community forest, I think covering almost 2,000 hectares. And they manage the forest very, very well. Yep. We have the Kota Damansara Community Forest. Of course, those of you from PJ will know this very well. And this is again a very great example of how a urban forest reserve is managed and maintained by the local community. I believe Justine will speak about this later. We have the case of Tanjung Kupang in Johor, a fishing community that manages the marine ecosystem around their village. I think this is a very classic case of a very rural community that manages the coastal environment very well. I think Julian Hyde is here today, so maybe Julian can share some examples, other examples later on. And of course, the Tagal system in Sabah is very famous, has been going on for years, and now I believe we have more than 200 villages in Sabah and some in Sarawak that have successfully practiced the Tagal system, a community-based fisheries management. So all these are great examples of how communities are managing natural resources and the environment in their neighborhood. So the idea of the forum is again to share experience and get feedback how we all, civil society, local communities, the government, the private sector, can contribute towards enhancing this local community contribution. Those of you who are familiar with the national policy on biodiversity, the goal number one itself talks about empowering and harnessing commitment of all stakeholders. Target number two calls for contribution of indigenous people and local communities to be significantly increased. Specifically, if you look at the policy in Target 6, Action 6.3, it calls for developing community conserved areas as an integral part of our PA network. Action 6.5, very relevant to the work people at Bukit Gasing and Kota Damansara Forest are doing, protect and maintain biodiversity in urban areas. So in the policy context, this has been strengthened. And of course, at the state level, for example, Sabah recognizes Tagal Hutan, which is a community conserved forest, as a way of forest conservation. The state of Johor in its environmental policy calls for empowering people to manage the environment. So in the policy context, So we have support at many levels. And of course, SDG itself calls for partnerships towards achieving SDG, goal number 7, which calls for partnership among all stakeholders, right? So in the context of this forum, the questions that we would like to ask and the questions to which we seek feedback are, number one, what motivates local communities to manage the environment? Why do some communities do it and some don't? And in situations where they do, why some local communities succeed and some don't? Where there is success, what are the key success factors? How do we create better partnerships between government and non-government entities? What sort of policy framework and support systems that we need now, in addition to what is already there? And then for local communities to better participate, what sort of skills do they need? How can they be given these skills? And to cap all these questions is, last question is, how do we increase local community participation? Because I think this is vital, because we all know the government alone cannot do everything. We all know the private sector alone cannot do everything. To do it well, we need partnerships. And the question is, how do we get local communities to become better partners? How do we support them? So that is the focus and the agenda for the forum today. What I'm going to do now is to invite the first speaker. The first speaker today is is Justine Was. Sorry, I got slip of the tongue. Not 500 countries. This is our first speaker is Justine Was. Justine is from the Habitat Foundation based in Penang. And I think Justine has been in the civil society arena for a very, very long time, right? I think she was the pillar, or she was very instrumental in the success of the Kota Damansara community forest. With you her experience, and then you can ask her questions. I think Justine, maybe 10, 12, not more than 15 minutes. Go ahead. Your microphone is off.
Now, yes. Dr. Bala, can you hear me? Everything
yes.
okay?
Everything
all right.
okay? Yep.
Okay, good. And you can see my screen, right?
Yep.
Okay, so I'll start with the presentation. There's only 10 minutes, and I'm going to try and keep it short. Just to contextualize this discussion, I think that one of the things that really hit home after the last time we did this presentation is that we really have to put this whole thing in its historical context. And so I'm just going to do that, and that's why this presentation is looking at community-based conservation in the Anthropocene and engaging the power of participation. Okay, so the thing which really really strikes home from when you look at the national policy on biodiversity is how closely it mirrors the Aichi targets, right? And so when you think about the time when people set out the Aichi targets in 2010, 2011, you can already see the sheer level of panic in the wording, right? If you look at what they state, all right, is to take effective and urgent action. The Aichi targets were set because all countries across the world were failing terribly at conserving biodiversity by conventional means. And so Aichi was important because for the first time, you were starting to see everybody come and help, right? You were seeing stakeholders are needed, mainstreaming is needed, participation is needed. And this started to create the spaces in where communities have a valid and active role to play, all right? So participation was supposed to be the factor that was going to change the outcome. So I'm sure that the irony is not lost on you that now in 2020, right? It's the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. It's the end of the UN Decade on Biodiversity. It is supposedly the conclusion of the Aichi targets. And we have never been further away from anywhere that we set out to achieve. So just to recap the depressing news of last year, right? So the IPCC already explained that if we're lucky and if everyone pulls together, we may stay below 1.5 degrees Celsius. We cannot do anything in this present context without understanding the severity of the challenges before us with regards to climate change. Let's be science-based about it. We have 12 years, possibly less. I think we are caught up in the news by the day, by the week at the moment, but then this is what is before us as people who are working in natural resource management. Okay, in addition to IPCC, we had IPBES, right? Which basically said that not only are we affecting climate, we are also affecting the planet's ability to support life, and biodiversity and all that have never been critical. And business as usual is no longer an option. So this is the context in which we are now operating in. And so with this framework, well, also the scorecard has not been good, right? You can see that we are not doing so great in terms of SDGs, IT targets, or any of our climate goals, right? So from this point of view, I think CBNRM, right, community-based natural resource management, is just one of so many tools regarding participation and openness to new ideas, approaches, and partnerships that we really need to get serious about. We are in a situation where we have to be creative, we have to be quick, and there's an urgency about it. And communities are a big part of that. And then just to cap off a really quite depressing year, we are really already starting to see climate change in ways that we never fathomed or believed that we would witness. Right, this is the scenario of last year. You can't see the last slide, but that's actually the Opera House. It's Australia. Okay, and so the Amazon, right? That if the Amazon is kind of like your older sibling who's going to make your parents proud, and now is failed. In some respects, are the younger sibling who now has to carry on the legacy of, of rainforest and rainforest services. So my question to all of us is that, are we really stepping up in terms of megadiversity, rainforest country, in terms of taking up this challenge? Where is the discussion on, reporting on our targets? Where is the discussion on how we're changing business as usual? Okay, so I'm just contextualizing that when we're looking at community-based work, I'm also looking at everybody who is not, who can be private sector or it can be anyone, right? So we have to look at the narrow window of time that we have, and we need transformative change. And I love this very nice statement from our National Policy on Biological Diversity. It's a shared heritage, it's a shared responsibility. Nobody has more rights to look after or to degrade or to use than the other. It's something that we all need to use together. Okay, so just briefly, community-based natural resource management really started to flower when people began to understand about issues relating to the management of the commons, right? They realized that in actual fact, community systems across the world were bioculturally diverse, which means that many of them were hardwired. They had inside them the programming to manage ecosystems so that you did not actually exhaust them, right? And so this is kind of a rescue of a concept that traditional communities have been using for a long time that kind of got outstripped by the language of development, which was to transform idle landscapes into productive and economically rich, driving forces. And now we're going back to rescue what we almost threw away, right? And this requires a lot of support. A big part of CBNRM is, of course, that, yes, we want to achieve biodiversity and conservation and environmental protection, but we also need to make a case for it with those communities who do need to look after their needs, and there are elements of social justice in there. Okay, so I'm going to skip through this because you can probably read it, look at the playback on YouTube. But I want to pull out the idea of connection, right? Being connected to a place is one of the things that drives community-based action. And the other one is knowledge, TEK, understanding that knowledge, and that's really powerful. And so we can see that in this particular example of how Aboriginal Australians, right, when empowered, can actually employ their own knowledge to try to manage the forest not getting out of control through, annual burnings and so on, based on their, thousands of years of oral history, right? It is also people who've got very strong links between the cultural identity to that land are the ones who are going to put themselves in harm's way in order to protect it. So those of you who know a little bit about me know that I worked in Sabah, and I was actually seeking out those communities that, according to all of the literature and the book knowledge, said, okay, this is probably going to be a really good community who's going to look after the environment. They're going to be people that are heterogeneous, forest dependent, and all that, all of the classic ingredients. And true enough, this community fitted all of those things, right? They were very supportive, and through that action, they put in a request that conserved a large portion of forest in a very high altitude catchment area, something like 12,500 hectares. Okay, so this area, based on community action and with a little bit of know-how, they've managed to conserve this area until now. So there are elements in where that can be achieved in terms of development and protecting certain areas. Right, so this was one of the case studies in this document, a review in Sabah in 2011, where there were so many different kinds of community conserved areas. But one of the cool things about this particular study was that it revealed that in actual fact, you didn't have to have all those ingredients. There were so many different kinds of community conserved areas. Some of them achieved conservation when that wasn't even the main objective, right? So the first examples are sacred sites, prayer grounds, but also the fact that there were certain areas which, the local communities just, looked after the water catchment for the gravity feed systems, but multiply that by 13,000 villages. It was a tremendous amount of effort, of which the population as a whole benefited. So one of the key takeaways from this review is that conservation can emerge in all kinds of circumstances, but what are the drivers where we can support them, right? What are favorable conditions? And on the right are some of the ones which I've just kind of distilled. Recognitions of the rights to steward, not necessarily to use up and profit from, but just the right to steward. Support from policies and other government incentives, funding and technical assistance, and strong community leadership and governance systems. So in this kind of scenario, I mean, in terms of support, I'd like to, just actually acknowledge the role that various organizations have played in supporting grassroots movements like the Global Environmental Facility Small Grants Program. So as a result of SGP's support for Kota Damansara Community Forest, which actually, to be fair, the fight and the campaign to conserve this little bit of forest started long before me. But I only helped to kind of strengthen it once the gazettement had taken place. But it was so many different organizations that were involved. But now it's a model of collaborative management. I'm going to skip over this. But this business of trying to conserve urban forest and try to rescue this entire urban area to something more livable is going to require this participation of a lot of different groups. And KDCF Society has a new grant from SGP, and they are looking for partners in the local sphere. All right. Okay, skipping over this, this particular project will be for 18 months, and it'll be looking at planning levels to identify where there's forest that can be saved and where those communities are that can be paired with them or already beginning certain work to conserve it. We have capacity building for CBOs as part of this project. And finally, there's training also planned. Everything, of course, is scuttled now because of the MCO, but we will get back on it and probably be using systems like this to keep us on track. Dot Woon, who is the president of KDCF Society, is in this group, and she can tell you more. Okay, moving forward. Sorry, Dr. Balak, can I have 2 more minutes? Okay. Okay, finally, other sources of change are those private sector. The private sector is also a great, it can bring in new things that can bring about change. So Habitat Foundation is an example of a family trust that's getting involved in biodiversity conservation, which is fed from the funds that come from the running of our park on Penang Hill. Right? In itself, we are also a proof that ecotourism and biodiversity can generate economic activity and can pay for itself. And as an example, I think Agnes is going to come up with talking about the Kinabalu Ecolink and how community-based approaches can help a government agenda to succeed. One example is Habitat has also helped in the federal government's application and nomination for a biosphere reserve on Penang Island. So that's one example where you can team up, right? This is in the map of the proposed biosphere reserve. Okay, I think I've taken up quite a bit of time, so I'm just going to try to wrap up more quickly. Shah is here, and I want to actually get him to talk about what Perak State Parks is doing to involve local communities in a much more direct way. And that's one example of where you can strengthen protected area management. So I'll let Shah talk about this later. In terms of advancing knowledge frontiers for conservation impact, the Habitat Foundation has funded a lot of species research, which is really managing to tap into amazing traditional ecological knowledge. So we found that in just 3 months, communities have been able to find information on the food plants of gibbons, for example, that would have taken 3 years to accumulate. Okay. Similarly, work on tigers has been assisted by Batik research and Entomia researchers that have been able to track scats of tigers and carnivores. All right. Okay, I don't know whether Yong, who has helped to build the trails in Kota Damansara Forest, is here, but my Changkul has also expanded on to head off into Balum, is helping the community there to build an ethnobotanical trail, which they themselves will own and manage. And already in terms of strengthening protected areas, the Gunung Perlis Trail, which is 10 kilometers built with local outdoor groups, is another thing which is revitalizing community involvement with protected areas in a partnership. Okay, so these last 2 slides deal with the efforts to strengthen local participation in policing against poaching and encroachment. So I'm going to stop sharing my slides and pass back to Dr. Bala, but there's just 2 things I wanted to say before that, in the sense that people will ask you, but what's the secret ingredient? And I'll say that the downside is there's no one-size-fits-all formula. And then my second thing to say is that the upside is there's no one-size-fits-all formula, that the capacity to create systems that work, they exist everywhere. It's just our creativity to partner with other stakeholders and supporters to find ways to bring these things together. Okay. Oof. Okay, so that's a lot. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and pass it back to you, Dr. Bala.
Okay, thank you, Justine.
Yeah.
You spoke about various communities, starting from the communities in a very rural, remote area along Pasir, to a very urban community, Kota Damansara, to the Orang Asli community working in Belum. So, what is the common theme that runs throughout these 3 very different communities, yet they all are committed towards managing the environment in their neighborhood?
I think that I guess the common theme is a strong vested interest, right? So there is a sense of unity. If you're in Long Pasir, of course, it's much more current. There's your water, your whole way of life is affected by potential damage from logging. In Kota Damansara Forest, it was actually land property owners, right? So the stakeholders are people who stand to lose, right? And what was interesting about them was that they're nothing alike, in a sense that you just had to figure out what was the common thread that would link people in terms of what would motivate them to get involved. And Kota Damansara Forest, I mean, urban communities are kind of lazy, right? They don't necessarily want to make their life hard and campaign, and all of this is something they would do even if they were not paid, right? So this is something that sufficiently motivates you, but that you can see a way forward, right, towards building something better. So, yeah, that's my short answer.
We have questions, and those of you who have questions, can you use the chat function? So our first question is from Hannah Zulkifli. I'll ask Hannah to ask the question instead of reading. Hannah, you want to ask Justine your question?
Oh, okay. Hannah's asking about lack of connection to the land.
Yeah.
Do you mean because of people are becoming disengaged from the natural environment, Hannah?
Hi. Yeah. I think for most communities in Peninsula, they're not that connected to the land. I mean, not like the indigenous people, or not like especially people in Sabah who are very connected to their lands. So is it maybe that is the cause that it is hard to do community-based approaches here in Peninsula? It's just that I'm thinking out loud here.
All right. Okay. I don't know. I think it'd be interesting to hear what other people have to say. But Dr. Bala, why don't we throw this question out to other people to answer? Yeah,
Okay, I think
that,
since
like,
you
people in
mentioned,
Thailand and all that, for example. Yeah.
okay, since you mentioned Shah's name a few times, so
Yes.
maybe we'll get Shah to speak now.
Okay. Shah.
Shah, you need to unmute your microphone. There you are.
Okay, I've unmuted. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
All right. So, well, you caught me by surprise there. I was listening intently.
Okay.
Anyway, what Justine said just now was really one of the key factors, which is what is the benefit to to the local community? Strong vested interest. By the way, Doc, how do I on my video?
The right
You
hand.
can press
Okay,
Control E.
okay.
Control E.
All right.
There you are. Okay.
So
All right.
okay, so maybe it's easier if people can see me. So basically, there has to be some form of vested interest in why people do this. In that context, because I've been with Justine in Kota Damansara Community Forest, and now I'm with the Orang Asli in Royal Bloom. So the two communities differ in terms of what are the benefits to them. But you do need to find a point where benefits go back to the community. For the urban community, it will be more intrinsic in terms of they're enjoying the aesthetic. They can spend time in urban nature. They have recreational benefits from it. But for the orang asli is a different story. For the local communities in asli villages, you need to tell them a story that they understand. But basically, I would like just to talk about the orang asli a little bit, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
Uh, Basically, it's giving due respect. We are learning from them as we teach them. And teaching them doesn't mean looking down upon them. It has to be based on some mutual respect in terms of acknowledging that they have been on the land for a long time and they have valuable traditional knowledge. It's just that turning those knowledges into something practical where they can benefit out of it. For example, the Tagal system. Even in Royal Bloom, we have adopted the Tagal system. Of course, we call it Akachep, which is the local Jahai language for Tagal. And we tell them in terms of the importance for conservation of species. We tell them in terms of the value of having the species and how they can benefit from having ecotourists coming to their place and stuff like that. So there must be some benefit. It has to start with some vested interest. And then the conservation value will come later on. When they see they do earn something or they do make something out of what they practice, later on they will ask the conservation values. As far as the state park is concerned, long-term conservation value of our forests and biodiversity rests very much on the local communities. That is the only way because, rangers, park wardens come and go, but the Orang Asli has been there for thousands of years and they will continue to be there. It's how do we engage them, give them the sense of respect, empowerment, skill set, and also ability to generate some income, some revenue from the activities that will ensure that they will look after and have themselves feel as stakeholders to the landscape. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Shah.
Right.
Justine, can you respond to Ipin's question and then before we move to the next speaker? Okay, we have lost Justine.
Okay, I'm here, I'm back.
You're back. Okay, good.
All right. Okay, so Ipin is asking about how do you manage the balance between modernization and conservation, right? In actual fact, I think from all my experience, I would just like to say there is no association between modernization, being non-modern or modern and conservation. For example, the people in Long Pasir are as modern as can be, right? They are modern in how they behave, how they engage with the government, and how they are equipped with modern tools, right? The issue here is about self-determination and having control over the things that you want to manage in order to manage your development, right? So being modern is not an issue, right? It's not that someone that's more traditional is more conservationist. It may not necessarily be the case. The case study of the Kinabatangan is one of the best examples of this, right? Communities there, we all know about Batu Putih and how they've done fabulous work with reforesting the riverine forest in the Kinabatangan. They have actually pioneered new forms of reforestation and have sustained it for over 15 years. But all of these communities were formerly logging communities, right? They were not they were modern, they were engaged in the extractive industries, but it made sense to them. Something about incentives, changes, communication, new ideas, ecotourism, all melded together in the decision to, okay, let's not do logging and let's oil palm, let's conserve this oxbow lake and let's reforest this forest reserve. These are all decisions being made in the contemporary landscape with new information and with the right kinds of supports. So what I'm getting at is that community-based conservation is not about rescuing something or preventing something from becoming lost, but it's about putting in all the inputs that make it make sense. So that's probably my example. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Justine. I think we'll move to the next speaker. So those of you who have questions for Justine, you can still ask them towards the end. But now I'd like to call upon Dr. Pelf, who runs the Turtle Conservation Society in Terengganu, and to share her experience working with terrapin conservation in Terengganu. Pelf, where you are, you're there. Okay, great.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yep, we can hear you.
Right, okay. How come it's not sharing my slides? Okay. All right. Good morning. Thank you, Dr. Bala, for inviting me to share a little about our community-based terrapin conservation project, which I initiated in 2012. It's been 9 years. Well, I just wanted to quickly introduce to you these local villagers who have been with me since 2012. They were former poachers. They used to collect terrapin eggs for their own consumption, but they are now working with us in our community-based conservation project, and they no longer eat terrapin eggs. Very fast, very quick slide. These are our conservation partners. We will not be able to do what we have been doing without the support, either financial support or manpower or advice or technical advice from these people. So we are very grateful for these partners. So let's dive into our community-based conservation project, which is in Kampung Pasir Gajah in Kemaman, Terengganu. So when we started this in 2012, I trained local villagers in basic field techniques and data recording. Well, these people, they know more about the terrapins than I did years ago because they used to collect these eggs for their own consumption, right? So I came into the picture and I didn't expect to teach them new things except for data recording, how to correctly measure the terrapins, microchip the terrapins. We also used to measure all the terrapin eggs as well. And you see on the screen now is Nasir. Nasir is he works in the forest, so he's used to dealing with logs, balak, kayu balak, and for him to help me remove sand from the eggs, something that is so delicate is really something commendable. So this was our first hatchery in the village. We used to incubate these eggs in this plot here. It was a very simple plot, just held together by a couple of recycled planks. We didn't know whether this conservation project would continue beyond its first year of operation. So we didn't put in a lot of money into it. And also because at the beginning, we didn't have much funds to move around. So we started with something that is quite low cost. But this is now what our hatchery looks like now. It's more proper looking with individual signages and labeling. So it looks better now. Pachiwaze, I would like to introduce you to Pachiwaze. He is about 57 years old this year. He has been one of the few local villagers who had been with the conservation project since 2012. Before we moved to our new hatchery, we were incubating the eggs right next to his house. So he allowed us to do that, well, at no additional cost. And Pachiwaze, he was from Kampung. He was from Kuala Berang, another kampung, not from Kampung Pasir Gajah. So when he came to Kampung Pasir Gajah, he was considered as a nobody. He didn't fit in. Yeah, he felt like people didn't quite pay attention to him. But after he was working with us in our conservation project, he started to become popular in the kampung. And if you go to the kampung now and you look for Waze, people ask you, Waze mana? Everybody knows Waze Tuntong because he has been our focal person in the kampung since 2012. So this was when he had more hair. The building, the house you see at the back is his house. And the hatchery is right next to his place. And he allowed us to use his house. And we have hosted numerous groups at his place. And he is really somebody you would consider totally changed from somebody who used to consume terrapin eggs to now working to save terrapins. Getting back to Dr. Bala's question, what motivates local communities to manage their environment? I would say that from in the beginning when we started this project in 2012, he was motivated by money. I mean, let's be honest here. Who among us is not motivated by money? We go to work because we want the money, right? For our other things, for our installments, for our car, for our house. We are all motivated by money. 9 years ago, he still had many kids in school. And 9 years later, today, most of his kids are already grown up. They're already no longer in school. They're already working. So he doesn't, well, I shouldn't say he doesn't care about money, but it's not that tight now. Money isn't that tight now compared to 9 years ago. So what motivates them? I would say that in the beginning, to get Pachiwaze to cooperate with us, it would take a little bit of coaxing. So I would say, you know what, you do this and then we're going to get that. So you get many terrapin eggs, we incubate them. When we release them at the end of the year, a lot of people will come to the kampung, a lot of people will see your efforts. So I guess that's motivated him as well. Moving on, this is Nurul. Nurul is 35 this year. She has 2 kids now. She used to have just 1. At the beginning, I was working on this conservation project by myself because remember I said we didn't have money to hire interns. We didn't have money to hire help. So every time we had new hatchlings, I would go to her place. I would measure the terrapins by myself and she would see me do this work. And one day I asked her, Nurul, do you want to help me with data recording? And when she said yes. So then I taught her how to record properly, what I was measuring. And then later on, I taught her how to read digital calipers. And the first time I paid her an allowance because I truly believe that nobody should work for free. So the first time I paid her an allowance of 50 ringgit for helping me with the work, she had tears in her eyes. So that was the first time she was paid to do anything that she earned. She earned this money herself. And Nurul is also a great cook that, of course, nobody in your family tells you you're a great cook, right? We don't sing praises that much at home. When we started taking guests on educational programs, I take them to her house. And then in the beginning, I asked her, hey, Nurul, can you cook something for our guests? Or can you help me go buy some pisang goreng and make some teh ais limau for afternoon tea? So initially, she did that. She went out to buy these refreshments. And then later on, she told me, Mek, tak yalah, Nurul boleh buat. She told me, we don't have to go buy other people's refreshments. I can cook. So then I commissioned her to cook for our guests. So in the beginning, we had about two guests per week. And then that grew to 2 families. And then over the course of a few years, that grew to 2 busloads. And I've always ordered from Nurul. And now, Nurul owns a roadside warung in Kampung Pasir Gajah. So she's her own lady boss. So this, even though it is a terrapin conservation project, I find that it is really empowering because these ladies in the kampung, previously they don't earn their own money. They just, well, if they're lucky, their husband, their head of the household, give them money for barangan dapur to buy food, groceries. But it is a different feeling if you earn that money yourself. Mokti is our oldest gang. She's 63 and well, she's a seamstress in the kampung. She sews baju kebaya, baju kurung for teachers, anybody who just goes to her shop to order traditional dresses from her. When I approached her for the first time to be involved in our terrapin conservation work by fashioning our terrapin batik into marketable products, she was very surprised that we would approach somebody elderly like herself in the kampung. She was so grateful for this business, which to be very honest with you isn't much because we haven't been able to roll a lot of this merchandise out in a big scale anyway. But she was truly grateful for the opportunity to earn the extra money in addition to the baju kurung and baju kebaya that she was already sewing. Some of the things that she sold for us, the bandana as well as the pouches for our reusable straws and fork and spoon. So we have been working with the men in the kampung for so many years. We also go to school, play with kids. We tell the kids the importance of saving terrapins and why we should not eat all their eggs, because in 20 years, in one generation, we would lose these terrapins. But in 2019, I realized that we have unintentionally left out a group of people in the kampung, which is the ladies. So we haven't been able to work with the ladies, probably because, from my side, I didn't think about that. But in 2019, we initiated a group menjahit, a ladies group, obviously. And we started with 3 ladies in the kampung who had a sewing machine in their homes. So we sewed a couple of different products, which I will show you in the next screen. We did product development with them, and we buy the materials because they do not have the capital, to buy cloth by the bulk from the shops in town. So we did that. We buy this cloth directly from the shops in town and send this cloth up to the kampung for them to sew. But these ladies, these 3 on the screen, they approached me and they told me that they would like to be a part of our group menjahit, but saya tak ada mesin jahit. So they don't have a sewing machine at home, but they want to be involved. So I thought, you know, what are the things that we could sew without using the sewing machine? The first thing that came to mind was this batu seremban, these 5 stones that we used to play when we were kids. And we also made some hair ties, or hair bands, you call them. And you know, this lady you see on the right, she's wearing a red skirt. Her name is Izan. Izan, her husband works in oil and gas, so they're not exactly poor, but she has never worked all her life. She has 3 children. The second time we paid her money for sewing this batu seremban, she held the money in her hands. She kissed the money multiple times, and she told me that the money that we paid her the first time was still at home inside a tong biscuit, in a biscuit tong can. So she appreciated this opportunity to earn her own income. And well, we are selling the batu seremban for 10, 12, 15 ringgit. So as you can imagine, the upah jahit is not very high because there are other costs you need to consider. But the thing is, she felt empowered to make her own money. So even though we paid her a little bit of commission for sewing this batu seremban, these 5 stones, she kept the money. I'm pretty sure she keeps the money for something for herself, which is okay if you ask me. So these are the things that the locals in the women in the kampong has sewn for us. We started with 3 ladies in 2019. We now have 10 ladies sewing various merchandise that we sell on our online shop. And in case you're wondering, this is our online shop, and this is my mom, my number 1 fan. So this is what our terrapin batik looks like. We commission these batik blocks ourselves, so you probably don't find this terrapin batik anywhere else in the market. In addition to the sewing group, well, not everybody is interested in sewing, right? So we are trying to reach out to more people in the kampong. What started, if you remember, what started as a community-based terrapin conservation project involving just the local men, it has evolved into also for us to go to school and play with children. And then we are also now involving the ladies who sew merchandise for us to sell, but not everybody is interested in sewing, right? I'm not very interested in sewing. So then we initiated this soap making class with ladies. A lot of people turn up in the couple of classes that we have made, and the initial idea was to offer them an opportunity to make these chemical-free, plastic packaging-free soaps that they can sell in the beginning small scale in the kampong, and then later on, if they want to, if they have the resources to, they can also sell these soaps on Facebook. So instead of us going to the kampong and handing out cash to these families, we are teaching them how to make money. And making soap is one of these projects. So before the MCO, we purchased quite a bit of raw materials for these ladies because they didn't know how to buy things on Shopee or on Lazada, and a couple of them still do not have smartphones. So we didn't want to have any barriers between them, the ladies, and making money. So we said, you know what, okay, I will buy these soap bases in bulk, and you can buy from us. So then we bought a lot of soap bases, and they are now sitting in the office, and we are planning to turn them into soap so that we can recover some of our costs. So back to Pakcik Wazir. So Pakcik Wazir in this photo is seen repairing the restraining nets in the hatchery. Well, previously he had our interns helping him with this work, and now he has to do it himself. We have 700 terrapin from hatchlings to 4-5-year-olds in the hatchery. Our last terrapin release event scheduled on the 21st of March had to be cancelled due to the MCO. So right now we have 700 in this head starting pond. And end of April or beginning of May, we should have the new 2020 batch of hatchlings coming out. So we will need help because we are not able to conduct our terrapin awareness programs to raise funds. So we will need some help in this respect. If you want to help us, please sponsor a bag of pellets for the terrapins. It's only 70 ringgit for 20 kilo bag. You can get them on our website. But what I would also like to address in this short session is that why do some local communities succeed and some don't? Some of you have known me from 15, 20 years ago. We initiated a similar terrapin conservation project in Setiu, but that didn't work out. Unfortunately, we had to terminate the project in Setiu in 2015 due to various reasons, but one of them was that we were unable to get collaboration from the local villagers. Each time we went to the kampung in Setiu to ask for help to do certain things, the first question they would ask me was, berapa pihak nak bayar? How much was I going to pay them to do things like erecting a hatchery, erecting an incubation plot in the kampung, right outside his house. But with this community in Kampung Pasir Gajah, Wazir never once asked me how much I was going to pay him. He let us use his house. He let us use his house to host families, school groups, school students. He never asked me for additional money to pay his water bill because we were using his money, but I paid his water bill because I felt that was right to do. In this respect, I think some local communities succeed because intrinsically they want to help save terrapins. It's hard for us to go to somebody's kampung, point our fingers and say, hey, you should not do this lah, you should do that. It's like going to your house and tell you, oh my God, you should fold your clothes, not leave them on the sofa like that. It's not nice, right? So what we do with the local villagers is respect. We respect them for what they do. I never once said that you eat terrapin eggs, you're causing them, to become extinct. We never say that. We just show them that this action of consuming terrapin eggs will lead to their extinction. So then we let the local villagers make their own decision whether to continue consuming the eggs or joining us in our conservation project. And with that, I end my talk today. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take them. Dr. Bala, back to you.
Yes, thank you, Pelf. I think this is the fourth or fifth time I'm hearing your presentation, and each time I'm mesmerized. Before I open the question, just probably I think you've explained this very well, but but I think people probably don't see that all this takes a lot of time, a lot of patience, a lot of hard work, right? Success to many years.
Yes, it does. Oops.
Is that right? Hong Chen Wen.
I didn't hear you.
There was a Hong Chen Wen. So the question is, a quick question for Dr. Pelf. Mind to share how you brainwash former poachers? And how many of the poach into a new leaf? How do you brainwash them?
Okay, I actually do not brainwash them. But I tell them what I know about the terrapins. I told them from the beginning that this whole habit of collecting terrapin eggs for consumption is not sustainable. Well, which they agree with me because they are from the kampung. From the moment they met me for the first time, second time, we sat in the kedai kopi and started to chat about terrapins. They knew more about terrapins than I did back in 2011. So they knew that the terrapins, there were fewer and fewer terrapins in the river because you know why? 20 years ago, they managed to collect a lot of terrapin eggs for food, kan? But 20 years later, macam dah kurang. Betul tak? Dah kurang tuntung. And then they kept nodding their heads. So I didn't have to brainwash them because they already knew that the terrapins were becoming fewer and fewer in the river. And they just didn't have the knowledge, I guess, to do a conservation project. So that part was the easy part, but the part about getting them to work with us and do a lot of things in the kampung together, that part needed a bit of motivation.
Right. I think is Julian Hyde here? Julian, because very often we hear a lot of community-based management in the terrestrial environment, but we have a lot lesser examples in marine and coastal areas. So Julian, can you share with us examples of community-based conservation in the marine domain?
We work on Tioman Island and we work on Mantanani Island. In Tioman, we've got some people involved in a group called the Tioman Marine Conservation Group, we call it, which is a group of people who help us out with net removals, with mooring buoy replacements, a variety of small-scale marine conservation programs. We pay them an allowance when they come and help us. Not many people are putting in work time without payment, but there's plenty of time they do put in, which doesn't get paid for, in meetings and discussions. We're setting up a new organization there together with Department of Fisheries under the DOF's Reef Care program. And that one is taking time to set up terms of reference and so on. So there is some free. I noticed Gavin's comment about, other comments about whether or not people need to be paid to join in this sort of thing. And Pelf is saying that she's got a lot of help, which has been unpaid. Our experience has been more that in places where people have busy jobs, like as they do on the islands during the tourism season, that you need to pay them to get them to come and help. But that hasn't been a problem so far, raising funds for that. And similarly in Mantanani, although there is more voluntary work going on there, where we are working with the youth group in Mantanani, and they're helping us out with some small-scale coral planting. We've also done a lot of capacity building on the island for improving skills for employment in the tourism industry. That's proving problematic at the moment, given the state of the tourism industry now. So there's a couple, those are two examples of community initiatives, community-based initiatives. There is some debate or some discussion around how much people should be paid to do this. As Pelf said, I think she doesn't want to see people having to work without being paid for it. So making it sustainable is difficult. But if you want to talk about the will of people to get involved, that is certainly there. People on Tioman want to get involved in working with the marine park. People on Mantanani want to get involved in conservation type programs, particularly the younger people. So there are plenty of people out there from communities that do want to get involved.
Thank you, Julian. Pelf, there are a few questions for you. There's a question from Khalis Rahman. Asking, besides listing terrapins, other efforts to improve the terrapin habitat. And there's also a question from Kresha, asking, how did you choose a particular local community to work with, and how do you gain their trust? So maybe.
Okay, we get to Khalis's question first. Besides releasing the terrapin back into the wild, are there efforts to improve the terrapin's habitat? Regarding this, we are using away from method instead of a toward approach. Some of the threats to the terrapins relating to their habitat includes sand mining operations in the river, agricultural activities where people plant palm trees right to the edge of the river bank, and the Kemaman River is influenced by the northeast monsoon. The river gets flooded at least once every year. So that's something that we cannot run away from. But we do work with the local authorities to reduce the number of licenses to be given out to new sand mining operations, sand mining projects. So that's with regard to terrapin habitat. Regarding Kresha's question, before we chose this community, I did a survey along the Kemaman River, the whole length of the Kemaman River. There were many kampong, and we actually spoke to each individual cluster, if you allow me to use this word, each individual kampong. We sat down with the local villagers and we asked them questions, and from there we gauged their willingness to work with us. Just like in a marriage, you want to get married with people who want to get married with you, and only then you get things done, right? So similarly, in the conservation project, if they are not willing because they think that once we go in, we would stop them from eating terrapin eggs, for example, or any other beliefs that they might have, for working with a local NGO, then we will spend time to explain things to them. So we won't force them into doing it. So one of the kampung that the local villagers said yes to our conservation project was this kampung Pasir Gajah. So in that respect, it was a lot easier, smoother, I would say, not easy, smoother, because the local villagers already wanted to do this. And then coincidentally, we went to their kampung and chatted with them about this conservation project. So we got to work right away.
Right.
There's another question up there, which we missed earlier from Gavin. Aside from monetary approach, I ask this question to myself almost all the time. What am I motivated by? So I want to give the local villagers the similar recognition that I get. I shouldn't be receiving these awards and appearances in the newspaper. They should be the one appearing on newspapers because they are the ones doing this work. I am more like a supervisor for now. So recognition in newspapers and TV programs, these are very important. Each time somebody comes over to say, oh, I want to shoot your terrapin project, this and that, I would say, you know what? I will only agree to this if you also agree with having a couple of local villagers in the program, in your whatever program you're shooting. And apart from recognition in papers and TV programs, I acknowledge Pakcik Wazir every time we host tourists or guests or groups, students in our terrapin conservation center. Every time, whether or not he's there, I will say that we started this, we get to where we are now because of Pakcik Wazir, as well as a group of other local villagers in the kampung. So I guess they feel that I am not there to take over these resources and be a star in the kampung. So I guess that's why they continue working with us, because we are willing to share this recognition and we are willing to share this all the good things that come out from this conservation project. How long did it? One more, Dr. Bala. How long did it take me to build the trust and interest of the community? I would say for now 9 years. I started this project in 2011/2012. It's now 2020. I have attended numerous wedding, kenduri kahwin. I have attended funerals. I have attended kenduri cukur rambut. I have attended Majlis Raya punya kenduri, Hari Raya. So I guess the trick is not how long you spend in the community, but what you do in the community. Like you have to really take them as your friends and families for them to feel that vibes. And then they will also treat me as a friend and a family, not just by showing up every day, but then you're not connected with them in a deeper level. Wow, this is deep.
Thank you, Pelf. Trust building is so crucial in this sort of thing. Yeah. Let's now move on to Dr. Agnes. Dr. Agnes is from the Southeast Asia Rainforest Research Program based in KK in Sabah. Agnes has been, she's been the civil society for very, very long time, and she's an anthropologist by training and very, very familiar with community conservation areas and traditional knowledge and issues like that. So Agnes, the floor is yours now.
Okay, hi everyone. Let me just get my slides up and get that sorted. Okay, Dr. Bala, can you see?
Yes, I can see.
Okay, so hi everyone, good midday. My name is Agnes. Thank you for the intro, Dr. Bala, and thank you to ERE for the opportunity to speak. Today I have 5 slides only, and it's going to focus on an example called the Kinabalu Ecolink, which is located in Sabah. The Kinabalu Ecolink refers to a landscape near Mount Kinabalu. It also refers to an initiative that is being run by the Sabah state government through the Parks Management Agency, which is Sabah Parks. I don't work for Sabah Parks, but at the earlier days, so back in 2009, when Sabah Parks was interested in the question of ecological connectivity, they had commissioned ERE to do a feasibility study. And I was part of that team, along with many others. So the Kinabalu Ecolink is an initiative that was born from that feasibility study, and after the feasibility study has been implemented by Sabah Parks up until today. So it's ongoing. The initiative responds to the question, which is entirely ecological. How do we establish ecological connectivity between two protected areas? Sabah has a vast expanse of protected areas. It's like if you brought together the total area of protected areas in Sabah, it would be slightly bigger than the entire state of Johor. But these protected areas are fragmented in some cases. And so the ecological question is, how do we establish connectivity between these protected areas for very long-term ecological functioning and integrity? So it's a very ecological question. And why this example is really important that I want to talk to you about today is because it took an ecological question and responded to it through a people-centered approach. I am going to go very quickly through the examples, so I will oversimplify. I will just say that now, caveat. It is a very complex situation. It is multifaceted, and there is a lot of variation within the landscape in terms of successes and challenges. I want to actually talk about it from a design point of view, which is where we started at feasibility stage, and less so about the doing, the implementation part of it, which I'm not directly involved in because that's being done by Sabah Parks, but I've been interacting with it over the years, and so would like to highlight some key points. Okay, so the problem solve, as I said at the beginning, started with an ecological question of how do we establish connectivity. So you see here at the top left of your screen a map of Sabah that shows Kinabalu Park at the north, and the green long thing in the south is Crocker Range Park. And my square has moved. Anyway, you'll see this landscape. The landscape actually refers to this bit here between these two parks. So if you look at the right hand of your screen, you'll see Kinabalu Park in the green corner on the top right, and the Crocker Range, northern tip of the Crocker Range Park sticking out from the bottom of your screen. And the idea was to look at connectivity. So if you drew a straight line from the tip of Crocker Range Park all the way to Kinabalu Park, that would be 10 kilometers. And in these 10 kilometers was a forest reserve. It is a fully protected forest reserve called Tinompok Forest Reserve. And overlapping with Tinompok Forest Reserve is the Bundutuhan Native Reserve, which is a gazetted native reserve under our land code. The entire landscape that we were focusing on was at the time populated with an indigenous population of about 11,000 people. When we looked at the landscape, we found very clear salient points. The first salient point was that local people had been living in this landscape for a really long time. Like, if you those of you who've been to Mount Kinabalu, the first recorded climb was in 1851, and actually the British climbers had gone through the communities here. So we've got documented in published literature that these settlements have been around since at least 170 years. So it was a very established indigenous community, and if they were displaced, because we wanted to gazette a new protected area in this intervening landscape, they would have nowhere else to go because this is their home. The other salient point that we found at the start, at the feasibility stage, was that there was actually contiguous forest between these two protected areas with Tinompok in the middle. So these colorful shapes that you see here, the yellow and the blue, pink, green, purple, brown, and orange and green here, these represent the contiguous forest that was already there at the time when we were doing the study in 2009 and 2010. And this gave us an indication that even though local people were living in this landscape, And you know, there were livelihoods activities such as agriculture and road development and so on, and settlement development. There was still existing contiguous forest. So that was number one, to say that actually connectivity would be possible if we just maintained, do not lose any more forest that is left standing in this swathe, and if we continue to reforest areas where you could try and reduce the bottlenecks, so do some forest replanting. And also you'd need to address livelihood activities to ensure that they were compatible with the objective of ecological connectivity. So what we looked at from a design phase was inevitably, whatever we came up with, what solution we came up with, had to have the interests of the local communities in the middle, because we're not going to get rid of them. They weren't going to go anywhere. And so they had to be very much the drivers of the solution. And since we also decided that it was not going to be possible to gazette a new protected area in this intervening area, we knew that Sabah Parks would not be managing these forests that we had identified. These forests would have to be managed by the communities themselves. Now, I want to draw your attention to all the black dots on the map, and these are the centers of the settlements. And you will note that actually what we were asking of communities to keep forests standing was quite far from most of their settlements. So the settlement, the community territory had a kind of gradient from settlement area, which didn't have a lot of forest, and then it goes along, you have farmland with a little bit more forest, and then maybe you might have some rubber along the steeper slopes, and then you get into what was really very good, in some cases, primary intact forest. We did a lot of consultation with local communities, and we tried to understand where were their traditional boundaries so that we could configure actions that could be taken at a community level as a single unit. And that's why there are all these wonderful colors there. So the yellow shape at the bottom corresponds to the forest that falls within the traditional territory of a community cluster, namely these three communities here, Wasai, Nuluhon, and Kimulau. And similarly, you would see that forests in the pink area correspond to forests that fell within the traditional territory of those communities there. And this thing that divides is actually a ridge. And so we found out that people living on the west side of the ridge didn't really interact very much with people living on the east side of the ridge. And so these was distinctly separate traditional territories. And that's why you have the divide of colors. Bundutuhan Community Forest is intact primary forest, and they have a management system that has been there since probably the turn of the millennium, which is a community-based forest governance system that is very, very strong. So when we picked our local champions, we were looking at communities who already had inherent governance systems as an example for other communities to say, hey, look what's happening in the other parts of the landscape. And here are some examples for you to think about in your own community as to how you want to go about governing this community forest. The big thing we found out straight away is that the notion of ecological connectivity, the notion of a wildlife corridor did not go down very well with local people. People responded very negatively to the idea, and people felt that this was something that reinforced the dichotomy between welfare of animals being more important than the welfare of the people who live here. And so what we tried to do was disrupt that dichotomy. Why does it have to be so binary, you know, animals versus people? And we came up with a concept of, we didn't come up with a concept, we leveraged the concept that was already there of communities looking after their own forests that fell within their traditional territories. And so the solution for ecological connectivity then was this network of 9 community conserved areas, which are the ones in light blue, that if we could make this happen, And if communities could adhere to the simple principle of keeping your forest standing and reducing threats to biodiversity and restoring degraded areas, that this would secure forest connectivity between the two protected areas. Okay, so easier said than done. When we did the feasibility study, there were communities who went for this very much and said, okay, the idea of community forest is great, but what's in it for us? So we looked again at what were the needs in the area, and we found out that actually land ownership was really, really low. It was about 5% tenure in local communities at the time. So one of the key aspects of making Kinabalu EcoLink work was having Sabah Parks, the protected area agencies, support communities to gain tenure over their community forests. And in implementation over the years, there are now small successes of this happening, where some of these community conserved areas have, together with Sabah Parks' support, made applications, and those applications have come through. In our land code in Sabah, there is a category called native reserve, which is not private land, but it is land reserved for the community that is held by the community. And at least 3 or 4 community forests have gone through that process or are undergoing that process, and at least 1 or 2 of them have now been gazetted to some degree. The other thing that we looked at the area is that, okay, we have Bundutuhan and we have Kianulu in the north, strong governance in the community, and these were great examples, but other communities would need more help and more support in figuring out governance, because we know that a community, like the rest of society, is very segmented. There are multiple interest groups within the community, and these interest groups often want to do different things that sometimes conflict. So it was also then about, okay, identifying champions at a community level, but then diving deeper into a community and identifying champion groups within that community that we could work with and support to try and get an all-community response to forest conservation. And then the final thing was looking at goodwill. So there was not a lot of goodwill when we started between protected area agencies and local communities. And that came from the same dichotomy, that protection versus community welfare versus community livelihoods. So we tried very much to disrupt that dichotomy. Why does it have to be so binary anyway? And the good thing about Sabah Parks was that they responded really, really well to the proposal of enhancing goodwill between the protected area agency and the local people who lived around it. And there was a very good and strong understanding inside Sabah Parks, much like what Shareza was saying just now, is that you need the communities around these parks to make the parks work, to give you that social buffer and to give you that ecological integrity and connectivity. Local communities have to be at the front and center of the action. So this is where I'm going to go very glossing over what has been implemented. When Sabah Parks took it over, I think they got started properly implementing in about the year 2014 and are still due to implement under current funding over into next year. What works? Number one, it worked really well that there was very clear who was the lead agency. There was strong leadership within the lead agency, and the lead agency established a dedicated team just to work on the EcoLink. That made all the difference. The dedicated team are actually quite young. They were all hired new, and they are quite young, and a large number of them come from communities in the landscape. The other thing that worked really well is that the goals were really clear, and it was consistently people-centered. In order for the Kinabalu EcoLink to work, you needed people to buy into the idea, and you needed people to keep forests standing. So we got to work with people to make this happen. Third thing that helped them a lot is they had a funder with aligned interests. This is really rare. Not all of us are that privileged. But if you get a funder that is going to stick with you for 6 years, which they have, and has very clear and aligned interests, it really helps. So those of us who work in funding agencies, there is a great role for a donor and grant making in this context to support these initiatives to flourish. Local champions, I've already talked about that. That's really important in every initiative that wants to work on behavior change within a community. A partner network. So this dedicated team in Sabah Parks did not work in a silo. They connected with people in academia, they connected with NGOs, they connected with community-based organizations, they connected internationally, and they connected across government agencies. So they had the Department of Agriculture come in and look at hill paddy cultivation techniques and how we can design it or do tweaks to it that would reduce threats on forest conversion. And in the end, when ecological connectivity, these ecological questions, they are like really the long game. Politicians, we know, think in 5-year cycles. Conservationists would think in much longer cycles, but ecologically, we're really talking about at least 100 years or 200 or 300 years to see something work. So while in the most immediate term, there were trade-offs. You did see tree loss because Sweden cultivation expanded, but you also saw some gains. So the losses and gains in the short term were really had to be managed so that they were tuned to pay off dividends in the most long term. And while we feel frustrated right now that, it's not really working out the way we thought it would, and this community has not decided to withdraw and everything, there are gains to be made from persevering over time. And so one example is that feasibility. There were a number of communities who said, no, thank you. We don't want to be part of the Kinabalu Ecolink. We understand what it's about, but we just don't want to be part of it. When Sabah Parks came through to implementation and their team went and did the consultations again, and then they built these examples of land tenure being secured and so on, those communities who decided to opt out at the beginning have now decided to come into the game and say, okay, actually, we think this is really great and we want to be part of it. So it's going to be adaptive. It's going to fluctuate in the most immediate term. Do not be disheartened. The dividends are in the long game. And then it's also looking inwardly at ourselves. Maybe I have not designed these activities in a way that generated that kind of impact. So how do I course correct in the most immediate term? I want to draw 2 examples of what Sabah Parks did. Number one, they, in 2014, signed an MOU with the local community and said, okay, Kampung Bundu Tuhan community, we're signing an MOU in the spirit that we're going to work together in the Kinabalu Ecolink. That made a huge difference in terms of giving recognition to local communities that we see you as an equal partner. And we are going to share resources and share expertise in making the initiative work. Another example that Sabah Parks did was they established something called a Council of Elders, which really has to do with traditional knowledge held by communities living closest to Mount Kinabalu. And the Council of Elders have an official role inside Sabah Parks to advise on, based on adat, the do's and don'ts related to accessing the mountain, because the mountain has spiritual and cultural value. The establishment of Council of Elders was another game changer in the relationship between the Protected Area Agency and the local people living around it, because it gave recognition that even though the mountain is inside a protected area and visited by hundreds of tourists, we still recognize that it is a cultural and spiritual place for you, and we want to integrate those values and your advice in how we manage tourism going up and down the mountain. And that kind of came from one request that the communities put forward, particularly the community of Bundu Tuhan put forward during the feasibility study. They approached Sabah Parks and they said, hey, the mountain is climbed by 500,000 people. Well, the park is visited by 500,000 people every year, and the mountain is climbed by, 20,000 people every year. And we're happy that people get to enjoy the mountain, but we want a day for our local community and our children to go up to the mountain and just spend some time in this place that is very special for us. And at that point, which was during feasibility study, you know, we didn't even generate a final report yet. At that time already, Sabah Park said, yes, okay, let's do it. And by the end of that year, they had a day when local communities were given free access to go up and down the mountain for a day. Some of them would go all the way to the top and accommodation was sponsored and so on. And then others actually just did it like you would go and visit a park. You would take your children and you would do a nice stroll around. You'd look at the vegetation around you. You'd enjoy the wonderful air and you'd have a chit chat with your neighbors along the way. And it is a beautiful example of community members sharing knowledge with younger generations, and they take their kids go for a walk, and it was not about a race to conquer the mountain, but it was about a day where they could just enjoy and revitalize this connection they have with a very special place. That community day event to access the mountain is something that Sabah Parks continues to do every year, once a year, every year until today. And because the park made that first move, the commercial operators started to follow. And so people who were operating the restaurants, people who were operating the bus shuttle service, people who were operating private accommodation up at Laban Rata level started to sponsor beds. Okay, we'll give so many beds to the communities to stay for the night so that more of them can access the peak for sunrise the next day. And that has been a really encouraging trend to see. But the lesson is actually the Protected Area Agency made the first move, and then the private sector very quickly followed, because there was that policy basis, if you like, that allowed private sector to immediately take action. So this is my last slide. This is a photo of the first community day held in December 2010. And this was the first batch of about 25 community members from 2 villages who made that climb. And this is them enjoying the sunset. And this gave Goodwill a place to thrive. And the relationship between the Protected Area Agency and the local communities had nothing to do with forest conservation. It had to do with the communities accessing a cultural site. And that gave it recognition that resembled the spirit of reciprocity. And most importantly, it established solidarity. So we are all in this together. We're all on the same side. If we work together, we can make the ecological linkage work. And that's really what I wanted to say. I hope you've seen that there are different examples. Even protected area agencies can do things that are people-centered, which help communities to be empowered to look after the resources in the territories where they live. Thank you.
Thank you, Agnes. You can stop sharing your file.
I am trying to.
Okay, great, thanks. Thank you once again. I think you know that EcoLink is also one of my favorite. Goodwill is absolutely crucial. And I have seen to engage, try build that.
Oh, Bala, we can barely hear you, cutting in and out.
Yes, I can't. I'm sorry, I missed that.
Yeah, I've got like 14% of that.
Okay.
Sign language.
Never mind. You know, my key point was goodwill is absolutely crucial, right? Without goodwill,
Oh Lord.
can't really move to share his views. Sure.
Shah. Shah, are you there?
Okay,
Wait.
can you hear me?
Okay, good.
All
Yes,
right.
I can hear you.
Okay. Thanks,
Turn on your
Agnes.
camera, Shah.
That was great. Okay. Hey, hi.
Oh
Okay,
dear.
thanks, Agnes. That was great. I just wanted to add that the is it clear?
It cut off just I
Okay,
think
you
turn off
try
your
again.
video,
It's
just
in
go
and out.
audio, I
Hi.
guess. Maybe it's just that.
Am I clear?
Yes. Okay, go ahead.
I think I'm stuck. Okay, is it better now? Can you hear me?
Keep
Yes.
going.
The if whether it be state park agencies or forestry or even NGOs, that's managing the areas, need to take the first action. You need to come out and embrace and go to the community. You can't wait for them. See, so it has to be proactive. And for the state park, just like Sabah parks, we have actually set up our Majlis Mesyuara or the Orang Asli Consultative Council. You have to give them, you have to show them that they are valued and respected. And to do that, you need to build your relationship, as Bala has mentioned. You really need to spend time with them, get down and talk to them in a way that they understand, in their, not their language, but in a way that they would understand. Do not think that a PowerPoint presentation or stuff that we take for granted are the way are the way to go. You have to really go down to the local community thinking. And once you get them to understand what you want to do, and you give them the skill sets, I can tell you they will perform. I've seen that. In Royal Bloom, we have actually put a zone, which is the cultural zone, and everything in the cultural zone, uh, everything in the cultural zone is done with the orang asli. No tour operators can do anything without the orang asli participation. And to do that, we need to identify what are the things that each of the villages have that they can actually offer value to the tour operators or to the outsiders, whether it's the Tagal system or it's a herb trail or a mountain trail. It has to be something that you help them develop with the kind of skill sets. What we need to do is not to have them leave their landscape. They can still stay in their village, do the things that they're good at, but at the same time earn something out of it, and also teach their own traditional knowledge to people coming in. So it's just giving that respect to them. But my point is, state agencies, NGOs, or whoever is involved, you must make the first move, and you must go and embrace the community and help them build something for them. You can't just wait for them. That's all. Thanks, Doc.
Thank you, Shah. I think there's a question by Julian, maybe both to Shah and Agnes. Julian, you want to ask now?
Yeah, I can. I agree with Shah that the agencies need to go out and work actively with communities. This sort of stuff doesn't happen on its own. I don't see, I think there's perhaps a difference in Sabah and Sarawak, but here in Peninsula, I don't see a lot of effort by agencies, government agencies, to go out and do this, to actually go out and find ways to work with local stakeholders. So we seem to be speaking from the perspective of local stakeholders a lot, and we seem to acknowledge that there is a lot of interest amongst local stakeholders, or that interest can be generated. When are the relevant state agencies or government agencies going to reciprocate and allow those stakeholders to have a say? Because there don't seem to be much, there doesn't seem to be much legislation supporting local stakeholder participation. There are policies. The biodiversity policy says local stakeholders should be involved. Aichi targets say local stakeholders should be involved. SDGs say local stakeholders should be involved. Where's the legislation that empowers and enables them? How do we move into that scene as well?
Yeah. Thank you, Julian. Shah or Agnes, you want to add?
Okay, I think the agency's leadership has to play a big role, and I agree with Julian. Unfortunately, Dr. Bala, not many of the government agencies actually read the national biodiversity policy, let alone community engagement. That's unfortunate. But that is something that NGOs have to. That's the challenge to NGOs, to go to agencies and tell them why agencies need to go to the communities, and probably help the agencies to do it. For Perak State Park, I've been involved in community development as an NGO for a long time. That is why it's easier for me once I'm inside the government agency to implement stuff. But Julian is right. It is difficult to get government agencies to understand, and that is the challenge of NGOs, to go and engage government agencies, because you can engage the community directly. You do not have the authorization, you do not have the enactment or act to support you to do it. So your challenge is to get the agencies to actually do it, assist the agencies. Once the agencies find the right people inside the agencies, the champions, not necessarily the big boss, but even the lower rank officers. Justine and me had this experience in Selangor. We might not get full support from the bosses in forestry, but they were excellent officers. Yeah, Justine? They were excellent officers like Gerard and other people that really supported supported us in KDCF to get things done on the ground. On the ground is more important.
I think, just to build on what Shah said, I mean, the thing about relationship building at kampung level, absolutely 100% relation building within government, right? You got to keep those relationships going. And I have to say that, I mean, the success that we've had in Perlis State Park, which is an example of actually hardwiring, working with local communities, Malay communities in Perlis, is because the director of forestry Perlis is formerly the district forest officer from Kota Damansara, right? And that's a relationship that's, years old, and they know that we are good value. We'll put our money where our mouth is. We'll support where we can, and above all, we are friends. We all are looking at the same objectives. So that's really important. Also in Penang, right? The effort to nominate the Penang Island Biosphere Reserve is also very much supported by friends in forestry. So it's really important. But what we need to see is some leadership from the agencies at the highest level, right? What we are seeing in terms of efforts, like for example, Shah, you're involved in World Heritage issues, right? There are community participation is definitely it's not it's a must-have. It's not a good to have. And so the capacity of agencies are being actually asked to demonstrate this. And so this is probably a way that we can try to nurture that ability and way of working, I feel. So Habitat Foundation, sometimes we're all about what we call ourselves as last mile connectivity, right? The ingredients are all there, but we have to find a way to put it together. And so we're always keen to talk to government and say, look, what help do you need? What helped you achieve your management effectiveness tracking tools and so on? So then that at least gives you a way to have a conversation about that. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Justine. Agnes, I think you would like to respond to this, and after that, maybe Dr. Mike Kawana and Devendran, you can ask your questions.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Bala. I'm going to try and leave my video off because I hope that I don't crack up so much. The original question was, in what other states is this happening? What other examples have we got of this happening in Malaysia? Not a lot, I'm going to say, outside of Sabah for me. Shabas to PSP for taking the very brave step forwards. It looks like it's paying off already. Now, small plug. Our organization is in the process of planning secured funding for a project to work in the Central Forest Spine, and our partner, funded by Yayasan Hasana, and our partner is the is JPSM, so the Forestry Department of Peninsular Malaysia. We are planning a 3-year project to do ecosystem service assessments at a number of sites across the CFS, which have yet to be identified, but we are going to open it up to all states involved in CFS implementation. And what our partner, so the Forestry Department, said is that they want to understand better the kinds of ecosystem services that are available in different parts of the Central Forest Spine. They also, secondly, want to understand how better to get stakeholder buy-in to protect, to keep forests standing so that the linkages would work. So we latched onto the idea of ecosystem services because the whole concept is about what are the benefits that people get from nature. And this concept of stakeholders benefiting from the protection of the Central Forest Spine would be we thought would be an interesting way in to see how stakeholders respond to that. And you need to have a very practical activity that people do together to build bonds and to as a platform for learning. So we thought the assessments could do that. That was supposed to start in June, and we don't really know how it's going to go now with the coronavirus situation. But as far as all of our partners are concerned, the project is still on, and if you want to know more, we'll keep you up to date over time. But that could be an example for Peninsula, hopefully.
Thank you, Agnes. Dr. Mike Kawana, you go next, and after that, Devendran. Your mic is off.
Can you hear me now?
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to comment on yeah, Agnes's really interesting talk and bring back memories from WWF days. And I was thinking of all the benefits and who gets the benefits in terms of connectivity, looking at that. And that made me wonder, first question, I'll just say a few things and then maybe tag a few things that Agnes could respond to. And that is the importance of water catchments, in how important that was in the Kinabalu connectivity projects. Because looking at the geography of there, I imagine that almost all those communities were dependent upon having undisturbed forest in their main water catchments so that they would have, drinkable water. So that's one direct benefit that humans get. I also wonder if anybody can comment on Central Forest Spine generally, which was really all about habitat connectivity, and for Peninsular Malaysia. Finally, on the connectivity issue, I just wanted to flag something to think about, which is urban habitats, because most of Malaysia's urban areas have lost so much of their biodiversity. Yes, there are places like forest, various community forest reserves, like the one I'm looking at out of my window in Kota Damansara. And I think my point is there that we could look at some point later, we could look at Singapore's example, where they set out about 30 years or more ago to provide urban habitats for birds by improving connectivity, improving the nature along roads, railways, streams, etc., to make much bigger habitats out of the smaller patches that they had in Singapore, and it has been quite successful. So I just think that there's just some general comments on how this matter of this issue of connectivity is absolutely key on so many fronts, just like it was in Kinabalu.
Thank you for that comment, Mike. Is this Devendran here?
Yes, I am. Hey, no, I don't. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Hello.
Yes, Devendran, we can hear you.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, so I won't, given the line disruption, so I won't say very much. I just wanted to find out from Agnes whether there was a inventory of any form that had been developed to recognize different forms of capital, particularly in relation to social or natural capital, as primary contributors to what I guess eventually was translated into economic value in the region. My last question, I guess, articulates that a little bit more. Thanks. Hi, did you hear that?
Hello, Agnes.
Hi, sorry. Did you hear that?
Indra, we heard your question. We're getting Agnes to.
Yeah, sorry. Did you hear my question?
Yes,
Yes, we
Devendran,
did.
I heard your question. Could you say it in simpler form? So you want to know whether any data has been developed to recognize, what do you mean by the value of social and natural capital as primary contributors to economic financial capital?
Yeah, so I mean, in a lot of the more recent focus, so I've been doing some work, which I'm doing some work now with WWF in terms of trying to think about a response to how the national development agenda should be reframed potentially to focus on alternative forms of capital, right, and not just the traditional mode of development which focuses and prioritizes on the development of financial capital in the system. So yeah, I was just wondering, as you talk about the skills and the knowledge of the local community and engaging with the tourism developers, for example, or tourism operators in the region, what type of, I mean, was an inventory of some form done about recognizing what aspects of local knowledge, local attributes, local relationships that actually contributed to that enhanced economic value as a result of the EcoLink project? Does that make sense?
Thank you. I think, okay, so firstly, I wasn't directly involved in implementation, so the data would be held by Sabah Parks. Based on the very little that I know, I think there's some data, but it's very patchy. And it would be based on initiatives, smaller initiatives within the Kinabalu EcoLink rather than the whole landscape as a unit. There is data that looks at an initiative in one of the community conserved areas where they've brought in interventions to build skills in the community to value add to their produce. So maybe backtrack a little bit. The whole landscape, people who live in here, the mode of livelihood is largely subsistence, supplemented by some cash cropping and formal wage labor, whether as teachers, nurses, or in tourism. So what they did was looking at environmental use of the lands, and a lot of it is used for agriculture. So some of the initiatives have targeted that, building skills to create value-added products coming out of agricultural activities. The funding that Sabah Parks has currently for the EcoLink is under a RED Plus initiative. So a lot of it is looking at maintaining carbon stocks while supporting local livelihoods. So I suspect the way they've collected the data is according to that framework. I'd be happy to connect you, Devendran, to people working in Kinabalu EcoLink, and you can get more information from them.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe I'll take the question offline with you directly. Thanks so much. Thanks.
No worries. Dr. Bala, if I can just go quickly to Mike's first question, Dato' Mike's first question about catchments. Yes, absolutely spot on. The contiguous forest that was remaining in the landscape at the point of feasibility corresponded very much with the watershed areas for each of those communities. None of them are on the grid, water grid, so there's no pipe water. And they were all gravity, they are all gravity fed systems. And so there was an inherent value within the community already that we had to keep this forest standing in order for us to get water. Absolutely correct.
Thank you, Agnes. Everyone, we have come almost close to 1 o'clock. Listening from everyone, for me, the common theme across all presentation and across all communities were, goodwill and trust. Gaining goodwill and gaining trust of communities is crucial. Without that, we really can't move. And I think all the successful projects have spent a lot of time and effort in gaining trust and building that goodwill. Yeah, that's the message that I get. But before I go on, maybe I would like to give all the three speakers maybe a minute each to just wrap up or summarize your views. Starting with Justine.
Okay, I think everyone has been brilliant and you've been spot on with many things. I just really wanted to drive home the point that the community is not going to be the cannon fodder in terms of achieving conservation and throwing them out there in order to give a social face to conservation. All success can be only achieved with governance, with partnership with government agencies, and a big part of that is looking at its own policies, setting a roadmap to achieve them, and having some kind of consistency, especially in terms of officer changes and things like that. We do need someone to drive it home and to stay with it for a number of years. Okay, that's my main feedback. Aside from keep trying, everybody, it's important.
Pelf?
Okay, I get asked this question a lot, so I just wanted to say that conservation is it's hard, it's tough, and extinction is a one-way street. And we all want to get this right. A lot of people go into conservation for the very wrong reasons. Well, you don't get rich from doing conservation work, but you do get a lot of satisfaction. You wake up every day knowing that you're contributing to wildlife and the local communities. So well, maybe that's just me, but if anybody wants to get into conservation, really be prepared to spend a lot of time working with the local communities. Otherwise, you would be better off working somewhere else. Yeah, that's my closing sentence.
Thank you, Agnes.
Okay, thank you. So I think I want to close by just looking inwards and saying that we are all community members ourselves. Right. And in the last month or so in Malaysia, we've had to change our own behaviors so that we could achieve something that would protect our society as a whole, the welfare of our society as a whole. So when we work with local communities in a conservation context, ultimately, I think some degree of what we're looking at is behavior change. And behavior change is a real garu kepala kind of thing. Yeah, it starts with yourself, but then you can change yourself, but what about the others? So I am right now doing a course, and I'm going to put that in a chat. I'll give you the link. That's in the chat now. That is a course on behavior change for conservation, which was put together by Traffic International. It's free, it's online, you don't have to do the whole course, you can skip through the bits that you want. It's actually about wildlife trafficking, but it's got a lot of beautiful nuggets that are very useful for understanding behavior change and conservation for any conservation initiative. And how would you go about designing an initiative that is all about people in the center of it? So have a good look and all the best. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Agnes. Everyone, we have come to the end of the forum. And from ERE's perspective, we are doing this because everyone is at home not doing very much. And I think we have found that this time, a lot of people are willing to share, willing to listen, willing to contribute ideas. So this is our small contribution, bringing the community together in many different areas of conservation environment. I'm just going to share with you. Just a few months. That's a big topic. policy. So you'll get the invitation soon. We hope to do it this week. So you just watch out for either WhatsApp or your email.
But Dr. Bala, can you repeat that? Because it's like we're all waiting and we missed it all.
Okay, can you see the slide? Hang on, let me share the slide again.
Since you're presenting.
Hang on. Can you see my slide?
No.
No. Okay. Nice moment.
But are you showing it on your screen?
Story is not coming up. Anyway, the next forum is called the National Policy on Environment, Battling the Challenges of the Coming Decade. So this is a forum that will look at the new national policy on environment for the country, and we hope to have it soon, most probably this week. So you just wait